art of war, Sun Tzu says, all warfare is based on deception. Hence, when we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Hello, darlings. This is Spies and Ties, and I'm Astrid Deinhard. Some practices of war seem as old as war itself. Deception and misdirection of the enemy are certainly among them. In one of our recent episodes, we talked about Eddie Chapman, aka Agent Zigzag, and his daring exploits as a double agent in service to His Majesty the King. In today's episode, we want to expand on the first assignment given to him by the Germans, the destruction of the de Havilland airplane factory, where they produce the infamous mosquito. For that, we need to look at one of the key figures involved in that operation, Jasper Maskelyne. Much like A and the mosquito, Maskelyne will distract the Germans again and again. But how do you destroy an entire factory in the north of London without losing the plane production? There are two options if you want a factory to appear destroyed in high-altitude surveillance photos. You can actually destroy it, or you can make it seem as if it was destroyed. For rather obvious reasons, the latter option was chosen, and while Chapman had performed incredible feats of bravery and cunning here, he was out of his depth. Cue Jasper Maskelyne, a renowned magician from London. His grandfather and father had both been revolutionaries in magic sphere, developing new tricks and illusions for the audience. Misdirection, manipulation, and deception lie at the heart of stage magic, and just as he had fooled audiences over and over again with his ingenious magic tricks, this time he would use them to fool the Germans. But how would one go about such a thing? What clever tricks and materials would be used to pull off this stunt? Turns out it's not as extraordinary as one thinks. Individually, the tools at his disposal seem quite rudimentary. Paper mache, netting, rubble, corrugated iron sheets, and paint. But the show Maskelyne put on would be more than the sum of its parts, because during the night between January 29th and January 30th in 1943, everything was set into place. The papier-mâché and wood were used to create replica sub-transformers, two of them rolled over on their side to mimic the effects of the blast wave. The real transformers, with the help of some netting and the iron sheets, were arranged as though depicting a well-sized bomb crater. Painters draped tarps over smaller buildings on the factory side, showing crumbling brick walls. Soot from the fire and debris from the explosion were strewn liberally in a 100-yard radius around the crater. In the cover of the night, even the green wooden gate was replaced by a damaged counterpart. While the deception would not fool anyone at close range, of course, from high above and from afar on the ground, the factory seemed all but destroyed. With the help of some carefully placed press releases the next day, the illusion was complete and the deception perfect. Chapman had succeeded at his first assignment, and Maskelyne had added another feat of grandeur to his list of wartime accomplishments. But what could possibly be more impressive than destroying an entire factory without damaging a single part of it? What if instead of camouflaging a factory, you would have to make something disappear that is the size of a small village? What if that thing was also closely surveilled by the enemy and of vital importance to the war? What if you had to make the entire harbour of Alexandria disappear? Alexandria Harbour was of crucial strategic importance to the British effort in North Africa. During 1941, the war in the desert had essentially become a race for supplies, of course, and Alexandria Harbour was where the Allied forces received theirs. If you want to know more about the war in North Africa and how the cunning desert fox Rommel tricked and pressured the Allies in this theatre, check out Indy's World War II weekly episodes from back then. Because of its importance in supplying the Allied forces with guns, ammunition, soldiers, and all other sorts of supplies, the Germans regularly bombed and otherwise attacked, of course, the harbour. This is where Maskelyne and his group were deployed to make the unthinkable happen. Camouflage the port to deny the German ambitions to blow it to smithereens. The cunning magician and his crew of misfits set to work and soon had an idea that exceeded the imagination of his superiors. He did not want to camouflage the port, rather he wanted to move it. How, you may ask yourselves? By building a dummy site in a bay roughly 1 mile away from the actual port. Luckily for the team, the bombing raids were conducted at night, and it's significantly easier to fool someone in the dark of the night than during the light of day. Light, however, is not only the enemy of magicians, but also one of their closest allies. It can fool an audience in the somber setting of a theatre, and maybe it could also fool the enemy in the dead of night. So, they began by studying nighttime surveillance photographs of the port. Using these images, they reconstructed the array of dazzling and gleaming lights normally illuminating the harbour. To complete the illusion, dummy sheds were erected and a mock fleet made from wooden frames and canvas was placed in the bay. One might think that the biggest challenge, perhaps, was the lighthouse towering before the entry to Alexandria Harbour proper. On the contrary, a plywood slab, a couple of vehicle searchlights, 6 wooden stilt legs, and voila! You've got yourself a lighthouse. To complete the trick, 4 craters, the house of damaged trucks and jeeps, and debris were prepared and laid out after the bombing raids to also fool the Germans during the daytime that their bombing runs had been a complete success. This grand illusion appears so great and perfect that it almost seems as if it were not real and just an enticing story. As a matter of fact, it might never have happened. I'll get back to that in a moment, because the British definitely did use fake lighting arrangements to great success in the UK itself. The main star of the show, however, is someone else. The man chosen by the British to head the decoy campaign was a former chief engineer to the Air Force in India and director of work and buildings at the Air Ministry. And this guy was John Turner. In 1939, he was tasked by the government with the development of day and night decoys which could be used to fool the German bombers. In the interwar period, Turner had worked on movie sets, applying his talent of make-believe to the audience of theatres. Just as he had tricked moviegoers through the lens of a camera. Now he would trick German airmen looking through the lens of their bombing sites or reconnaissance cameras. He used lighting arrays, just like the one allegedly used in Alexandria to create imaginary airfields during the early stages of the war. These sites were known as Q sites, but Turner also created K sites. These were supposed to fool the Germans during day raids. Fake planes were laid out, imaginary supply dumps created, and fake windstocks were put up. The commitment to a flash-out deception did not end there, however. Turner and his men also set smudge fires, which were lit around airbases to visibly indicate wind directions through their dirty smoke. They made sure to move the planes around to simulate the frantic and busy activity of a wartime airbase, including using trucks to create fake trucks from the taxiing of imaginary planes. In 1941, the decoy network was further expanded. The use of incendiary bombs by the Germans allowed for the creation of fake fire sites used to protect cities all around Britain from a real fiery grave. These various types of deception sites would come to be known by the code name Starfish. How effective did these efforts prove to be? Well, it is estimated that overall this type of trickery diverted 968 tons of German munition from their intended targets. There you go. So principally, the techniques used to destroy the factory and make Alexandria Harbour disappear were available and in wide use by 1941. But still something doesn't sit quite right in the whole Alexandria story. If you think about it, for instance, a decoy site just 1 mile from the real target, in a time where missing your target by a few miles during a bombing raid was considered accurate. This seems rather bold. That's the reason Turner usually looked for suitable sites roughly 5 to 6 miles from the original. It also appears that the story of Maskelyne and his magical exploits in Alexandria was pushed rather heavily by Allied wartime propaganda, for which it may have been fabricated. The story shows the ingenuity of British deception capabilities while making the Germans appear easily fooled. Now, who on the Allied side wouldn't want to make everyone believe this was the case? When you look at all the facts, it seems probable that the operation was much smaller than reported or even a fabricated propaganda story. But there be yet another reason that Maskelyne is heralded as the master of deception and camouflage. Might it be that we are still being deceived 75 years later? Enter Dudley Clark, and here he is. Clark had been a pilot during the First World War, but his responsibilities during the Second World War were rather different. In 1940, Archie Wavell, the commander-in-chief of the British forces in the Middle East, recognized the importance of camouflage operations and wanted to create his own specialized unit in North Africa. Clark was the man for the job. He had previously served under Wavell and had pleased the man through his many talents. Officially designated as Advanced HQ-A Force, the organization took up operations in Cairo in December 1940. Clark worked closely with Major Vivian Jones, an expert in visual deception techniques. She, at the helm of a unit of carpenters and tradesmen, could knock up anything from a column of wooden tanks to squadrons of plausible aircrafts. His first assignment served Wavell's Plan Camilla, the British were able to intercept and decipher around 90% of the Italian radio messages and thus knew what they feared most. The idea was to play into these fears and make these seem real and tangible. One of the Italians' biggest worries was an airborne landing behind their positions. Clark successfully fooled them into believing the fictitious 1st SAS Brigade had arrived. And Jones quickly fabricated dummy gliders to complete the illusions. At the time, these operations and the people behind them were veiled in utmost secrecy. Secrecy that went beyond deception and was a matter of life and death. Aside from his work in the camouflage department, Clark's A-Force also worked closely with MI9, the Escape and Evasion Organization. Essentially, A-Force was set the task to develop escape routes and devices for captured Allied soldiers. Double agents also proved most useful in deceiving the enemy, and you know that I've been talking about it, and Security Intelligence Middle East build up their network independently of MI5. Clark made use of these double agents to great success. But he did not only use spies, he also operated as one himself. In Lisbon, he pretended to be a reporter for the Times, and in Madrid, he was arrested disguised as a woman. At this point, in 1941, Clark had been confirmed by MI5 as a very important player in the secret war against the Axis. So, how does Maskelyne fit into the story of this man whose activities at the time were only privy to the very top brass of the government and intelligence agencies? Well, Clark was Maskelyne's boss's boss, and he worked on many of Clark's projects. And his reputation as the leading light in the deception world most likely was, and perhaps still is, a sham. Seemingly, most of the time his magic was used to entertain Allied troops rather than deceive the enemy. His greatest service in the field of deception may just have been to provide a cloak behind which others could work in secret. Among those hiding behind the veil was, well, yes, Dudley Clark. He encouraged Maskelyne's boasting for that reason, and Maskelyne, the renowned magician and seeker of the limelight, naturally did not mind the attention this put on him. Which brings me full circle back to the story about the destroyed factory. I told you in the beginning. You see, like so much in this video and in this story, there too Maskelyne most likely was not involved. It is unlikely he made the trip from Cairo just after the Battle of El Alamein in November 42, back to the UK to disguise the factory in January 43. Allegedly, his service record shows he remained in the Mediterranean area throughout the whole year of 43. There still is much to be unveiled and discovered about the truth of some of the operations supposedly pioneered and managed by Maskelyne. This is, as it seems, a deception of the highest caliber, which has been able to fool lay people and experts for 3/4 of a century. Whatever the outcome is, one thing is certain. Maskelyne and Clark were masters at concealing the truth and misdirecting the attention. To learn more about the fantastic adventures of Eddie Chapman, click here. It is the Time Ghost Army that enables us to do all of this. You should join at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And I will see you next time. Darlings.